Hello and welcome back to the channel and the Science of Folate series. Today we are talking about the humble Brahmin, the old reliable beast of burden you can find all over the wasteland. So what's the name all about? So the Brahmin we see in Folate are descended from Brahman cattle, an Indian breed that was imported to the US. The word comes from Sanskrit and means prayer or the universal soul, and they play a traditional role in India's caste system and social hierarchy. They become priests in Hinduism and are responsible for teaching sacred knowledge. So cows are considered sacred in Hinduism and represent life, peace and love. They are well cared for and protected, and Hindus do not eat beef. Milk is used for many religious ceremonies. So the importance of cattle to human society can't be understated. The domestication of cattle is of huge importance to human survival and the development of society that we know today. Cattle were first domesticated from wild ox over 10,000 years ago. Since then, we have created lots of different breeds of cattle. As I said, the importance of cattle to human society cannot be overstated. Cows produce a huge number of resources. So milk, from which we can make cheese, butter, cream, yoghurt, ice cream, all kinds of dairy products, and meat in the form of beef and veal. Veal has been made more humane in recent years. It has been a bit of a contentious thing, but things have improved there, but there's still more. So the skin can be used to make leather for clothing, upholstery, shoes, stuff like that. Other parts of the cow are used to make things like adhesives, candles and soap. The surfactant from the inside the lungs of cows is collected and can be used to help premature babies breathe. Until it was possible to make human insulin in the lab, bovine insulin was commonly extracted for treatment of diabetes, particularly for type 1 diabetics. So not only are cattle essential for food production, but there's a huge range of byproducts that have improved and even saved human lives over the years. Cattle can also be used to pull ploughs and carry loads. Machines may have taken over this function in some parts of the world, but cattle are still needed for this purpose as well. We've used selective breeding to create a number of breeds with different functions. So an example is the Holstein Friesian, which is the most common dairy breed in the UK. These cows are bred to have high milk yields and good quality udders. Jersey cows are also popular for more niche dairy products and kind of famous for having really good milk for certain purposes. There's a lot of different beef breeds as well, and obviously I'm more educated on the ones that are found in the UK. But there are a lot of them. Scotland particularly is best known for the Aberdeen Angus breed, which produces high quality meat, and the ever popular Highland cows, another beef breed, which they're known for their long hair and their tenacity. So domestication, selective breeding, means that the species is far removed from the wild relatives and probably would not survive well in the wild if set free, depending on where that is, of course. Farming has become more intensive over the last few decades with increased demand for food products. We now have robots that can milk the cows, monitor their health and provide their feed. If you want to learn more about dairy production, I would highly recommend looking up the Iowa Dairy Farmer. He has a ton of educational content on this subject on his work in dairy farm. Highly recommend it. It's really interesting. So let's look at the biology of domestic cattle. There's a few things that make these animals unique. So the domestic cow, which is Bos taurus, and they are classed as a large ruminant. So the males are called bulls, the females are cows, and the young are calves. Young female cows are known as heifers, and young bulls are called bullocks, while the castrated males are known as steers. They have cloven hooves, meaning that they walk on 2 toes on each foot. A lot of the breeds do have horns which don't branch and are not shed annually, unlike say deer, where the antlers tend to be shed on an annual basis and new ones grow each year. For cattle that doesn't happen. For the breeds that do naturally have horns, sometimes the calves are disbudded, which means they have a procedure done to burn the horn buds to stop them growing. This is done largely for safety reasons, because they can do quite a lot of damage with their horns if they get the chance to. So this is something that's performed for the safety of the other animals and for the people that are taking care of these animals as well. Size-wise, cattle can weigh anything from 600 kilograms to 1,200 kilograms, or 1,300 pounds to 2,600 pounds, depending on the sex and the breed. Their natural lifespan can be up to 30 years of age, although you will often see the average lifespan of a dairy cow quoted as 5 years. The reason for this is that an economic decision must be made if cows stop producing well, and there are dairy cows that do live much longer than this time frame. It just depends on how things go through each of their lactations, essentially. So cattle's, as I mentioned, are ruminants. So what does that mean exactly? You might have heard the fun fact that cows have 4 stomachs. This isn't strictly accurate. What they have is a 4-chamber stomach, where each chamber has a slightly different function. So the rumen is the largest chamber, and it functions as a fermenting vat. So it's full of microbes, bacteria, yeasts, protozoa, all kinds of microorganisms that break down the tough fibre in the cellulose and the plant material that the cows eat. The reticulum is the most rostral, i.e. the most far forward or towards the nose part, and it is lined with a honeycomb-like raised lining that gives more surface area for the material to be processed. The omasum absorbs water and nutrients from the contents, and then the abomasum is the final part of the stomach, and that is the one that's most like our stomach, which has a sort of mucous membrane lining and produces gastric acid. So the term ruminant comes from the process of rumination, which is also known as chewing the cud. What this means is that they regurgitate some of their food and chew it again to help break down the fibre and improve access for the microbes. Due to this, cows can eat a lot of things that we can't, such as corn stalks, grass, fruit peels and other plant byproducts from crops that are grown. Cows can make use of the bits that we can't, essentially, so it's quite impressive what they can make use of. So as a whole, domestic cattle are quite docile, easy to handle. They do tend to be accustomed to people, particularly in dairy herds, where they're checked and handled regularly, and they'll follow their herd and their group. There are issues with aggression. Bulls especially can be dangerous, and the size of cattle does make them dangerous. They can do a lot of damage if they charge at you, or even if they launch a kick at you. Believe me when I say it's terrifying to have 800 kilograms of angry beef charging right at you. I've been there, and I've never got over a fence so fast in my entire existence as I did that day. It's a fear that you don't know you had until you experience it, and 0 out of 10 would not recommend. So back to the Fallout universe. So what happened in the Fallout universe? So the Brahmin of Fallout are apparently descended from an Indian cattle breed, the Brahman, which was imported into the US for crossbreeding purposes. This seems to be the explanation for the name that's given to the mutated version, although there are a couple of kind of contradicting sources on why this is the name that's given across the entire of continental US. So the cattle have mutated, losing most of their hair and developing really large udders, and they do have 2 heads now as well. Each head is fully functional, and apparently they're quoted as having 8 stomachs, so what I would assume is that they basically have 2 sets of the 4-chambered stomachs, so 2 rumen, 2 reticulum, 2 omasum and 2 abomasum. Not sure, 100% sure which is how to pluralise these things, but I would assume that each head has an esophagus and a separate reticulum, rumen, omasum and abomasum that's connected, and then I guess they must join together maybe somewhere in the intestinal tract. I don't know. There's not an opportunity to really evaluate the internal organs of the Brahmin in the game. It is mentioned in the wiki, and there is kind of sources that suggest that the bulls of the Brahmin, the males, have 4 testicles as well instead of 2, but we don't see any of them in game. But at least that's double the Rocky Mountain oysters, I suppose, if that's something that you enjoy. Brahmin are a very common sight across the wasteland. They're kept for their milk and their meat, and indeed in the NCR the Brahmin barons are controlling large herds and have a lot of power and influence and a lot of money from having these massive herds of the Brahmin, and that gives them a lot of influence in the NCR territory. The Brahmin are a very important resource for the wasteland because they provide food They provide fertiliser for crops. Their skin can be used for clothing and armour to make leather. And they are also used as beasts of burden. Trade caravans use them to carry loads across the wasteland in pretty much every location in the games and in the TV show. The wild Brahmin that you encounter in the game are generally docile unless they're provoked. But you can go cow tipping in Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, so I will put a demonstration of that. What you do is you have no weapons, crouch down beside them and press the interact button, and you will push them over. Be aware that if you do that too many times, you can kill them in some cases, but it is something that people talk about doing in the real world is cow tipping. One thing I will say is that knocking a cow over is not as easy as you might think. And I say this as someone who was taught how to do it safely in situations where you might need to get a cow lying down on its side or on its back, which there are situations where you do have to do that in veterinary medicine, and it's not as easy as you might think. So definitely much easier to do in the game than in real life. You might come across mad Brahmin, which are aggressive by default, although they may be affected by the animal friend perk. This might be a reference to mad cow disease, or BSE. BSE stands for bovine spongiform encephalopathy. This is a very important disease as it's a prion disease. Prions are misfolded proteins that are able to be infectious and cause more of the protein to misfold, essentially. And the problem with these diseases is that the usual methods of disinfection, like using heat or bleaching agents, are very ineffective against this particular agent. BSE is linked to variant CJD or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans, and it was a major public health crisis in the 90s and the early 2000s, certainly in the UK. Cases have massively reduced in the last couple of decades thanks to intensive efforts to eliminate the disease, including making sure that every single bit of the central nervous system is removed from carcasses for beef, and any that have spinal cord tissue left behind are condemned and not used and don't get into the food chain. And there was also a scheme that compensated farmers for euthanising cattle that were over a certain age, again to prevent them from going into the food chain, so the farmers would be compensated for destroying these animals. It was a huge effort and a lot of different schemes in order to essentially eliminate the disease, and cases are extremely rare now. So BSE is called this because of the damage to the brain. So the image here shows what the brain tissue looks like. So it's stained with your standard histopathology staining that highlights the cells. So the cytoplasm of the cells shows up pink, and nuclei and certain other things will show up in a kind of purple colour. The white areas are basically holes in the brain tissue, so it ends up looking like a sponge, which is why it's called spongiform. Encephalopathy means disease of the encephalon or encephalon, depending how you want to pronounce it, which is the brain. There are related diseases in other ruminants as well. Scrapie in sheep, which may have been the source of BSE by feeding sheep nervous system material to cattle. That is believed to be the reason that BSE came about in the first place, unfortunately. So it is a disease that's seen in sheep, and one that's more common in the United States is chronic wasting disease in certain deer species, where these deer lose weight and start acting strangely, and that's also another kind of prion disease similar to BSE. So, there's a reference to that with the mad Brahmin, but these diseases are quite serious, and as I say, they're problematic because how they work is very, very strange. And the usual methods that work against viruses and bacteria and fungi and yeasts and moulds don't work on the prion diseases. So a little bit on the scary side, and not far off being a actual kind of zombie causing agent potentially. So just something to be aware of, and it's quite an interesting, if scary, subject. In the wasteland, there are other kind of variants of the Brahmin that you can come across. In Fallout New Vegas, there's a couple of places where you'll find the malnourished Brahmin. Of note, at Matthew's Animal Husbandry Farm, where the story of what happened there is quite sad. You can find some journal entries from a kid whose parents became ghouls, essentially, and he had to kill them and bury them, and then became really paranoid that the animals were going to kill him. And it's a bit of a parody of George Orwell's Animal Farm, so there's a bit of a kind of connection there. But when you go there, you find Brahmin and you find bighorners that are labelled as malnourished, because they obviously aren't getting fed properly and are a bit weaker. So the main difference between them and the standard variety is that their health points are reduced a bit, making them a wee bit easier to kill if that's what you want to do. There are some named ones in the games. One that's quite notable is called Queenie, and she belongs to a fiend by the name of Cook Cook. If you know anything about Cook Cook and you learn about him, there's a quest that asks you to basically assassinate 3 of the fiend leaders, and Cook Cook is one of them. If you look into some of the stuff he's done, he's a particularly repulsive fiend, and one of the targets of the quest 3 card bounty from Major Datry. One strategy that can help you to kill him is to kill Queenie, which causes Cook Cook to frenzy, which means that all his friends will attack him as well. So they can kind of do a lot of damage because he is well armoured, and he does have an incinerator and a flamethrower, I believe, as well, which he uses with abandon. So that's an interesting one, and you find that a lot of the kind of trade caravans in Fallout 4, the Brahmin are named as well, which is quite cute. So that's something. In Fallout 4, you can have Brahmin in your settlements, and they are very, very helpful. So you can place a feed trough, which is just a bathtub, and there's a chance that a Brahmin will show up instead of a person as a settler if you've got a settler radio beacon on the go. There is also a random encounter of a woman called Kelly who will sell you a Brahmin. She's a bit cagey about where she got it from, but she will sell you a Brahmin if you want one as well. If you have a Brahmin in the settlement, it will produce fertiliser, which is stored in the workshop, and it does also increase the food production in your settlements as well. One thing that apparently happens, I've never come across this, but if you do kill the Brahmin in your settlements, it's possible for them to drop a synth component, which suggests that the Institute might be putting them out as spies, a bit like the crows that you find all over the wasteland in Fallout 4 are as well. If you have got the Wasteland Workshop DLC, you've got the option of building a cage to attract Brahmin to your settlement as well, which can be quite useful. And if you set up the supply lines between your settlements, your provisioners will somehow just acquire pack Brahmin to help move resources between all your settlements, which only really serves the purpose of making it more realistic, because if they're provisioners, they're basically trade caravans that are allied to your settlement, so it would make sense that they would then use a Brahmin in order to carry all the heavy stuff from one settlement to another. So they can be very, very useful, but it does seem that a couple of them might be synths, so that's kind of an interesting one. But having the extra fertiliser is really, really good for if you want to build more plots for crop growing, or if you are in a jet manufacturing business as well. It can be quite useful because that's one of the main ingredients for making jet. Not that that's something that I would recommend, but you know, post-apocalypse, you do what you can to survive, I suppose. So that's pretty much everything related to these 2-headed bovines that you find across the wasteland. Cattle domestication and farming was a huge leap forward for human society in the past, and the survivors of the nuclear war of Fallout have clearly seen the value in these animals, not just as a source of food, but also as a way to move heavy merchandise and a bit of company on the road as well. So next week we will look at some of the other ruminants that you find in Fallout, which is the bighorn sheep, the deer, i.e. the radstags, and the Brahmin and the Gazelle, which you come across in Euclid, so hopefully you'll come back for that. And also coming next week is going to be the conclusion of Old World Blues, and there's another vault to discuss. I haven't decided quite yet which one, and there'll be more of Dragon Age the Veilguard of my first playthrough as well, if you're interested in watching that. But thanks for watching and listening, and as always, I'd love to hear your thoughts and any questions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.